What if the most powerful nation on Earth didn't fall because of war? What if it didn't fall because of a natural disaster or a plague or some unstoppable foreign army? What if it fell because of itself? Think about that for a second. You're standing at the top of the world. Your military is the strongest anyone has ever seen. Your cities are booming. Your economy runs the planet. People on the other side of the globe know your name and they're a little afraid of it. From the outside, it looks like nothing could ever touch you, and then, slowly, it does. That's the story of every great empire in human history. And here's the part that should make you uncomfortable. The pattern never really stops repeating. Here's what's strange about history. We know the names, we know the dates, we've read the textbooks. The Roman Empire, the British Empire, the Mongols, the Ottomans, the Soviets, each one at its peak felt permanent. Unstoppable, like the world had finally found its permanent rulers, and each one collapsed. But when historians actually dig into why, the answers are almost never what people expect. It wasn't just one war. It wasn't just one bad leader, it wasn't just one terrible decision. It was something much quieter, much slower, much more invisible, and that's exactly what makes it so terrifying. Because if you were living inside one of these empires during its decline, you probably wouldn't have even noticed it was happening. Everything would have looked mostly fine until it wasn't. So how does something that powerful disappear? That's what we're going to figure out today. To understand why empires fall, you first have to understand how they rise. No empire starts at the top. Every single one of them, Rome, Britain, the Mongols, whoever, started small, scrappy, hungry. In the early days, survival is the only thing that matters. Leaders are sharp, they're taking risks, they're making hard calls. The people around them are motivated because they have to be. Failure isn't some abstract concept. Failure means everything falls apart. That pressure creates something powerful. It creates discipline, innovation, unity. Early empires move fast, they adapt quickly. They outmaneuver bigger, slower opponents because they have nothing to lose and everything to gain. Think about the early Roman Republic, a city fighting for its life, surrounded by enemies. Or the early British Empire, a small island nation that somehow figured out how to dominate global trade. Or even America in its founding era, 13 broke colonies that somehow managed to defeat the most powerful military on Earth. The hunger to survive creates the engine of growth. And for a while, that engine is unstoppable. But here's the part nobody talks about enough. The same conditions that create a great empire are almost impossible to maintain once the empire actually succeeds. Here's where things get interesting. The moment an empire reaches its peak, that's actually when the most dangerous phase begins, not the rise, the peak. Because at the peak, something subtle shifts in human behavior. When survival is no longer the daily reality, when the threats feel far away and the wealth feels permanent, people stop asking the hard questions. Leaders stop taking risks. Why would they? Things are going great. Systems that once worked brilliantly become rigid. Nobody wants to mess with what's working. And the hunger, that raw, relentless hunger that built the whole thing, starts to fade. It doesn't happen overnight, it never does, but it happens. And here's the brutal irony: the more successful an empire becomes, the harder it gets to see the warning signs. Because from the inside, everything still looks fine. The cities are still standing, the army is still massive, the money is still flowing. But underneath the surface, quietly, slowly, the foundation is starting to crack. Now this is where most people think the story becomes about war, about some powerful enemy finally breaking through the gates, but that's almost never the real story. The real story starts with something much smaller. It starts with the cost of maintaining success. Think about what it takes to run a massive empire. You've got thousands of miles of borders to protect. You've got millions of people to govern. You've got roads and infrastructure and bureaucracy that all need constant money, constant attention, constant management. In the early days, expansion paid for itself. Every new territory brought new resources, new trade routes, new wealth. But eventually you run out of easy territory to conquer. And now you're just maintaining, spending more, earning less. Stretching your systems thinner and thinner, trying to hold it all together. Sound familiar? Here's where it gets worse. While the empire is busy managing its own size, the world doesn't stop moving. New powers are rising. New technologies are developing, new trade routes are forming, and the empire, which used to be fast and adaptable, is now slow, bureaucratic, stuck in the habits of success. A small threat appears on the eastern border. No big deal, they say, we've handled worse. Then an economic slowdown hits one province. Temporary, the advisors say, it'll correct itself. Then another province revolts. Then debt starts climbing. Then taxes rise. Then people start getting angry. One by one, small problems start connecting to each other. And suddenly, what looked like a dozen separate issues is actually one giant crisis. Here's the part of the story that history books sometimes skip over. During all of this, while the empire is slowly coming apart at the edges, the people inside the system are making it worse. Not because they're evil, but because they're human. When things get uncertain, powerful people don't suddenly become selfless. They start protecting themselves. Political infighting increases, factions form. The people who should be solving the empire's problems are instead spending their energy trying to outmaneuver each other. Corruption spreads. Resources get misused. The gap between the rulers and the people they govern gets wider. And trust, the invisible glue that holds the whole system together, starts to dissolve. Here's the thing about trust in a society: you never notice it when it's there, you only notice when it's gone. When ordinary people stop believing that the system works for them, they stop participating in it. They stop defending it. They stop caring whether it survives, and at that point the empire doesn't need an outside enemy. It's already losing the war from within. So here's the truth that changes how you see all of this. Most great empires didn't collapse because they were defeated. They collapsed because they forgot what made them great in the first place: the hunger. The adaptability, the willingness to ask hard questions and make uncomfortable changes. The Roman Empire didn't fall because barbarians were unbeatable. Historians today largely agree Rome had been declining internally for over a century before the final collapse. Political corruption, economic strain, and a population that had stopped believing in the system. The British Empire didn't fall because its colonies suddenly became stronger than Britain. It fell because maintaining control became more expensive than it was worth, and because the world had changed in ways Britain was slow to accept. The Soviet Union didn't collapse because America militarily defeated it. It collapsed under the weight of its own inefficiencies, its own rigidity, its own inability to adapt to a changing world. In every case, the pattern is the same. The empire reached a point where it could no longer respond, not to new threats, not to new ideas, not to the warnings its own people were sending. And once you lose the ability to respond, the end is just a matter of time. The consequences of imperial collapse are never just political. They're personal, they're generational. When Rome fell, it wasn't just emperors who suffered. Ordinary people lost trade routes they depended on. Cities that had been safe for centuries suddenly weren't. Knowledge that had been accumulated over hundreds of years got lost, sometimes forever. Historians call certain post-collapse periods dark ages, not because people became stupid, but because the systems that connected people broke down. And when systems break down, even simple things become hard. The people who suffer most during a collapse are almost never the ones who caused it. It's the farmers, the merchants, the families who just wanted to live their lives. The ones who believed the system would hold right up until the moment it didn't. And here's the part that stings: in almost every case of imperial decline, there were people who saw it coming. Historians who warned about debt. Thinkers who wrote about political corruption. Citizens who noticed the cracks and tried to sound the alarm. They were almost always ignored, because when you're inside a great empire at its peak, the idea of collapse feels impossible. Until it doesn't. Now look, this isn't just a history lesson. The reason this topic keeps coming back, keeps getting searched, keeps generating conversations is because people sense something. The patterns that brought down Rome, Britain, the Soviets, they're not ancient mysteries, they're recognizable. Political division that makes solving real problems almost impossible. Economic systems that work incredibly well for some people and increasingly poorly for others. A sense, hard to describe but easy to feel, that trust in institutions is eroding. America today is not Rome. This isn't some doomsday prediction, but if history teaches us anything, it's that no nation gets a permanent pass. The question is never whether a great power will face serious challenges. The question is whether it can respond to them. Can it stay flexible? Can it rebuild trust? Can it find somewhere that original hunger, that willingness to ask hard questions and make uncomfortable changes? That's always been the difference between empires that extended their greatness and empires that became textbook chapters. So here's where we land. Every great empire that ever existed once stood at the top of the world and genuinely believed, that it was different, that the rules of history didn't apply to them. They were wrong. Not because power is impossible to maintain, but because maintaining power requires something most successful systems eventually stop doing: staying honest about their own weaknesses. The empires that lasted longest weren't the ones with the biggest armies or the most gold. They were the ones that kept questioning themselves, that kept adapting, that never confused past success with future security. The ones that fell, they stopped asking the hard questions. And here's the thought I'll leave you with. When you look at the empires that collapsed, the scariest part isn't the final fall. It's how normal everything looked in the decades leading up to it. People going about their lives, leaders making confident speeches, the city still standing, the money still flowing, the flags still flying, right up until they weren't. History doesn't announce itself, it just happens. And the only people who saw it coming were the ones paying close enough attention. Are you?